Well, good afternoon. I'm sorry I will have to read because my English is not very good. And I will read this translation that a friend of mine made it, and I hope you can understand the pronunciation. I'm very happy and grateful for your presence and for your opportunity to be here. My name is Julio. It's Julio Delmanto. It's not Del Monto like it's in the program, but you can put, it's fine. You can put the A on the O, and it's kind of anarchy. It's fine. And I came from São Paulo, Brazil, where I'm a PhD candidate in social history. What I'm about to present here is the result of the research that I'm developing and should be concluded soon. Its theme is drugs and counterculture in Brazil in the 1960s and 1970s, and it somehow continues my master's research, which was focused on the relations between leftist organizations and activists, drug policies, and drug consumption after the 60s in Brazil. Beyond the academical work, I am also a member of activist organizations that fight for the legalization of drugs and human rights in Brazil, such as the Global Marijuana March, or Marcha da Maconha, like we say, that we organize in São Paulo since 2008. Before I start talking about drugs and counterculture in Brazil and about the first lawsuit on LSD in the country, I will talk a little about the history of the prohibition of drugs in Brazil. I'll talk Brazil has always been a preeminent position in international drug trade since its Portuguese colony days. There isn't any records of concerns or interest on the behalf of the state or the public opinion regarding the control of the consumption and the sale of psychoactive substance in the country until the 19th century. The city of Rio de Janeiro banned in 1830 the consumption and sale of marijuana, but what was in discussion back then was obviously the control of the black population, enslaved or free, in a context of decline of the slavery regime that would be only formally abolished in 1888. The city of Rio once had the largest population of black and enslaved peoples in America. It's only in the Penal Code from 1890 that the poisonous substance are addressed, and even though Brazil signed the first international treaties on the subject, it's only in the 1930s that a prohibitionism is solidified in our political and legal planning. 1930 was also the first year of the mandate of the populist President Getúlio Vargas, who reached power through a coup d'etat, referred as a revolution by its supporters, and ruled until 1945. It was a period that medicine was solidifying its political role in Brazil, with a heavy influence of eugenics theories and with propositions of social control, often with objects and discourse that were openly racist. In 1932 and 1936, two decrees made the setup for the 1938 decree that is widely considered a landmark on Brazilian contemporary prohibitionism. In 1940, drug reinforcement would be included in the new penal code. In August of 1964, under Brazil's military dictatorship, who also happened to call its coup d'etat as revolution, the government passed a decree that aimed to regulate the dispositions contained in the 1961 United Nations Convention. And in the year of 1967, a new decree added substances like amphetamines to the controlled substance list. There wasn't any explicit mention to LSD, which caused some repercussions on the specific case we're about to talk about. 1968 marked the beginning of the most repressive period of our military dictatorship, which started facing in a more harsh and cruel manner its leftist descendants, armed or not. In the same year, there were changes approved in the penal code that equated, for the first and only time in our history, the punishment for drug users and drug dealers. This leveling would last until 1976, when it was approved that was called Lei de Tóxicos, or Toxics Law, which would last by its turn until the 2000s. Our current law is from 2006, the year which the legislators softened the penalties for users and, on the other hand, harshened it to drug dealers, which helps to explain why Brazil nowadays has the fourth largest prison population in the world. So I will talk now about counterculture. On its research on sexuality, Michel Foucault noted that where there is power, there is resistance, and that there is never resistance in a position of exteritorial, I don't know, exterior. It's written there, but I can read. Goffman and Joy, in their turn on the book Counterculture Through the Ages, argues that what is known as counterculture is a natural drive in human history since time immemorial. Whenever there is culture, there is also counterculture. There are individuals radically separated from the founding assumptions on its society. Hard to be defined in a tight manner, it's in realness dimensions of social life itself, insolubly connected to the idea of freedom, in the words of the Brazilian anthropologist Gilberto Velho. Goffman and Joy refuses the definitions of counterculture as merely a distinct lifestyle from the majority, qualifying its essence as anti-authoritarian, a historical phenomenon characterized by the affirmation of individual power as a way of creating means of living different from those imposed by the authorities and social conventions. As a consequence, they define a few basic principles or meta values that would distinguish this way of acting and thinking from other ways of dissent. Primacy of the individuality in contrast with the social conventions and governmental controls, challenge to authoritarianism in its explicit and implicit forms, and the connection between individual and social change. Thus, if by this point of view we can consider counterculture the first diffusers of Christianism, Oriental philosophers passing through the Socratics, Romantics, witches, heretics, and the Parisian Bohemia from the early 20th century, for example, it's from the 1960s that the concept of counterculture takes form and spreads out in the popular imaginary, in the media and in the historiography. Or how would Goffman and Joy point out, the counterculture was consolidated in this period as a social movement with a libertarian character and a strong appeal to the middle-class urban youth. The changes begins to be searched and desired not only on political and economical terms, as the traditional left proposed, mainly in its Marxist branches, but also in the scope of personal relations and one's own individual conscience. If in the United States and Europe the counterculture movements reached at times a massive character, in Brazil the penetration and extent of those conceptions was smaller, which led the researcher Silas Guerreiro to evaluate that the movement barely scratched the country. I must highlight that the Brazilian context of authoritarianism and political restrictions had its particularities on the account of a dictatorial regime that was on march since the military coup of 1964, which did not only produce significant economical and political changes, but also had a big influence on the social imaginary itself. The dictatorship would end only in 1985, when a civilian president was indirectly elected by the Congress. Actually, it was the vice president that assumed, since the elected one died. The first election would only happen in 1989, and the elected suffered impeachment, just like our last president Dilma and probably our actual president Temer. Her vice president will suffer impeachment too. It's very crazy there. Even so, there were many people, especially middle-class white people, that identified themselves with the counterculture in our country. Some of them even searching to live in community. With the hypothesis that consuming and thinking about drugs had a significant role in the lives and practices of these peoples, my research aims through documents and oral searches at presenting how that came to be. There's also methodological reflection on the usage of oral searches, on memory, harm reduction, etc. This relation of proximity between drugs and counterculture didn't happen only in Brazil. In its book 60s Counterculture, Kallen positions American counterculture inside a wider and diversified social movement of social contestation in the 60s and the 70s. The specificity present by the author in order to highlight this counterculture sector within the field of the New Left is precisely the consumption of drugs, more especially the LSD, which according to her was popularized in the streets in 1965 and unleashed a wave of psychedelic madness that transformed America almost overnight. According to Kallen, the until then conservative atmosphere of the country was suddenly fractured by an unprecedented drug-induced revolution against traditional American values. The same emphasis given by David Farber, to whom the illicit drugs usage by American youth in this moment meant a cultural rebellion and a new cultural orientation. I quote a passage of his article, The Intoxicated State, Illegal Nation, Drugs in the 60s Counterculture, where he says, the difference between legally medicated, legally intoxicated, and illegally high did sometimes signify a new cultural orientation, even a cultural rebellion in the United States, both because some of the young white middle-class drug users insisted that it did, and because legal and legally designated authorities ensured that it did. Even though we can say that drugs have always permeated this story and the day-to-day life of American citizens, the difference between substance, its specificities, and the ways in which those were used, as well as their also specific motivations, are some of the things that make the 60s the 60s, according to Farber. He quotes a text by Jerry Rubin, in which he comments this exact connection between the illegality of substance and the rebellion of its condition and of the decision to keep using them. After saying that a whole generation of drug users was labeled as criminal, Rubin resumes the effect of this kind of policy to his generation. Grass teaches us disrespect for the law and the courts. In my work, I bring many similar quotes and opinions from inside the Brazilian context, like the one said by the journalist Luis Carlos Maciel, to whom the drugs were fundamental in the counterculture, or by the poet from Rio, Chacal, which once said that each acid we dropped was part of a search. Also a poet, Antonio Risério, classified LSD as the philosopher's stone of counterculture. In the book Acid Dreams, The Social History of LSD, this book points out that by the end of the 50s, over 1,000 scientific articles on LSD has been published in the US, and the number of patients involved was close to 40,000. Like in many places around the world, as well in Brazil, the pharmaceutical corporation Sandoz, from whom Hoffman worked for when he synthesized LSD, distributed the substance for doctors and possible researchers. This was done free of charge, with the only demand that the data collected would later be sent to the company, which didn't possess the full knowledge of all the possibilities of the substance usage. They also sent out LSD informative and propagandistic pamphlets. In my research, I found a few doctors that used the substance on themselves and in their patients in the beginning of the 60s, especially in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. A considerable amount of the people interested were artists, writers, actors, musicians, some of them very famous in Brazil, such as the writer Clarice Lispector. In an interview made from a research, the poet and writer Claudio Viller, who took part in a group of poets identified with the beat culture, told me that he made his first contact with LSD through medicinal usage. Viller also stated that until 1964 or 65, there was very little information on the substance going around between his friends and in the press. This can be confirmed with the research that I have conducted in the main newspapers from the country, in which I identify very few mentions of the consumption of LSD until the end of the 60s, when the subject starts to be newsworthy more often. Published in 1972, the book The Hallucinogens and the Law, LSD, was written by the judge Geraldo Gomes, who claims to be the author of the first sentence made in the country regarding the LSD-25, in September 22 of 1970. Other than the parts that mention the investigation and the defendants of this specific lawsuit that don't have their names mentioned, Gomes adds to the book transcripts of his sentence in the court. As aforementioned, in that period was enforced the 1968 decree produced by the military regime that equated drug usage and drug consumption with punishments that went for 2 to 8 years of prison for those conducts. One of the articles established even the prohibition to carry for its own usage intoxicate substances and substances that cause physical or psychological addiction, even those that aren't mentioned in the government government's official listing. Taking this decree as foundation, the judge Geraldo Gomes considered in its decision that any substance that brings physical or psychological addiction, whether it is specifically known as narcotic or not, shall be included in the legal prohibition. Accordingly, so the magistrate affirms that this is the first case that we know of that appears on the nation's justice system regarding the LSD-25, and therefore evidently nothing yet exists as a jurisprudence on the subject of this matter. Anyhow, however, there are widely known similar other sentences from our courts in relation to other drugs, he follows, that deny the main thesis of the defense attorneys, that LSD wasn't yet a forbidden substance until that moment. For the magistrate, that wasn't necessary, for in his view, there was a substance that caused addiction, which was proven by a particular report included in the judicial proceedings. For the judge, the plentiful material collected and researched from medicinal and pharmacological treatises and even works of propagandist intent, and therefore not suspicious on this aspect, this is his words, leave absolutely no doubt about the clear danger of LSD-25 consumption as a substance that generates physical and psychological addiction. The judge Geraldo Gomes leaves out the name of the defendants of this process of his book, but includes the number of the suit. With this information, I was able to trace it back on the Justice Court of São Paulo archive, and find that it was initiated in January 28 of 1970, with the flagrant arrest of the visual artist Antonio Petkov and 6 other defendants: Osmar Ludovico da Silva, José Gaspar Ribeiro, Domingos Proetti, Garibaldi Jr., John Emery, and Barry John Holohan. The arrest and seizure warrant is the next document, and in it we find that in that day, I quote, the artist Antonio Petkov showed up and presented to the authority 15 doses of orange-ish substance, accommodated in small silver paper bags, quantified in milligrams, and according to what was informed by the man, it was LSD-25. Up next, we come upon the warrant of arrest in flagrant criminal action that is brought at 10 p.m. of January 28, after the testimony of the conductor Angelino Molinterne, the detective of the narcotics department. I believe his testimony is worth quoting, even though you can read it in Portuguese, because his choice of words is very characteristic and funny. He is part of his deployment. He said that some time ago he was informed by his assistants of suspicious reunions on an apartment downtown, where a group of artists and hippies, young people with costumes and long hair and weird behavior, spent hours together. That the department started investigating what was going on there because of the noise and unusual behavior of the members of the group. That he began to grow suspicious of they were using some intoxicating substance or one that caused psychological addiction because of the behavior of the group by the end of the meetings when they left the premises. That the opponent also grew suspicious that they were consuming some different kind of drug, because in the apartment he later verified with the liquor stores in the region there wasn't alcohol consumption. That the opponent continued to investigate it, started reading all the news and information sources about new drugs, and especially those used by American and English hippies, like the lysergic acid and the LSD-25. From then on, the deponent claims to have gone to Petkov's apartment, located in downtown São Paulo, around 5:30 p.m. The artist, knowing that was the police, authorized the entrance of the apartment, where 2 other of his friends were taken to the station also were. The testimony continues. The deponent then went to survey the apartment and found, stashed in the bathroom cabinet, behind the mirror, inside a flask with an alert inscription, tiny little envelopes containing an orange-ish substance, envelopes of silvery paper, that the deponent suspected was the infamous LSD-25. The deponent interrogated the apartment owner, and that he confirmed that the drug was indeed the LSD-25, and that he had brought it from the USA and used it in his experience. With that information, the deponent declared the defendant's arrest. There are also some statements from the two friends of Petkov, who deny knowledge on anything about drugs and about being drug users. Up next is Petkov's testimony, in which he says that he doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and doesn't do other drugs. I quote a part of his testimony. That in 1969, the interrogated went to Europe, visited France, where he worked together with the band Mutantes, and at the famous festival Miden, and later went to England and then to the United States, where he arrived in February of 1969. That at New York he mingled with other artists and musicians in general. That at Los Angeles, in an artist encampment, the interrogated found out about the famous LSD-25, drug that he only had heard about. That this drug in the USA is widely used, especially between artists, and that's even sold on the street in Los Angeles, even though he doesn't know its price. That after acquiring the drug, he transported it to Brazil in his pocket. That in San Francisco, in the Avalon Ballroom, a concert hall, happened a collective experience, wherein, amongst artists, with about 180 people, directed by a Japanese philosopher, the interrogator used experimentally the famous drug. That in the entrance of this hall, the interrogator paid $3 and received a pill, a small pill with the same color of the drug now sized in São Paulo. In the statement attributed to Petkov, he says that he came to Brazil and being an artist, started consuming the drug. And that he knows perfectly well that in Brazil the use of drugs is prohibited, but that in the USA people use it very freely. Lastly, that he came to this interrogation willingly, not having suffered any coercion or embarrassment on the behalf of the police, who didn't even raise his voice on him. I must note that this kind of code was current in a period that, as it is widely reported, torture and police brutality were state policies in Brazil, as they continue to be, unfortunately. This case was also printed by the papers back then, with a photo of the artist with a long hair and a mustache. The edition of January 3rd of 1970 of the newspaper Folha de São Paulo brings a story with the headline, "One hippie, one actor, and one underage took LSD in São Paulo. Police seized 25 pills." With an almost fictional text, the article says that the three arrested didn't saw the entry of the detectives because they were tripping. The articles also says that once inside the station, an intoxicated Petkov exhibited all his knowledge on drugs, arguing with proficiency on LSD and telling with details its effects. He even quoted Aldous Huxley, the test said, which didn't guarantee the police chief's sympathy, who ordered the cutting of his hair and arrested him. On February 13, the case was reported by the newspaper Estado de São Paulo, with the headline, "LSD won't get you arrested." This article states that the pioneer on LSD drug trafficking, Antonio Petkov, got his freedom last night, and says that the attorney of the artist pleaded an habeas corpus act, alleging that LSD wasn't in the forbidden substance list. The newspaper also says that in his statement, Petkov denounced 25 people that bought the drug in his apartment. In another article by the newspaper Folha de São Paulo, published on February 14, titled, "LSD will be punished with prison because it's toxic," the police chief, Luis Carlos Rocha, claims that those who traffic the hallucinogenic known as LSD will be arrested and indicted all across the state, and that any doubts regarding the arrest of the painter Antonio Petkov were already cleared out. He says, "The release of the painter," affirmed the police chief, "was a consequence of a delay in the deadline of the judicial accusation, and not because LSD is not an intoxicating substance, as his attorney claimed." On February 15, the newspaper goes back to the subject in an article titled, District Attorney Indicts LSD Drugs Dealers Who Acted in São Paulo. The article reports that the district attorney indicted as drug dealers Petkov and the aforementioned defendants. According to the indictment, Holland and Emery had brought a large quantity of LSD from Europe in order to sell in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And in order to do so, they went after Osmar Ludovico. He then started selling to his acquaintances, including Petkov, and addicted to the substance ever since he visited the United States, as says the article, where he also met Barry Holland. Back to São Paulo, Petkov went after Holland and bought 100 pills to sell to his friends. On February 25, the newspaper published an article with the initial statements of the defendants, where they denied the accusations. The article highlights that Petkov said he took LSD only once in Los Angeles. On September 30, Folha de São Paulo published a short article with a paragraph titled, "Convicted in the LSD Process." I quote, "On February 13, in the Court of Justice, the first process in São Paulo justice on LSD culminated with the conviction of the defendants. The judge of law, Geraldo Gomes, in his sentence of 150 pages, the largest one he ever professed in his long career, imposed to the defendants Barry John Holland, John Emery, Oscar Ludovico da Silva, Antônio Petkov, José Gaspar Ribeiro e Garibaldi Jr. the penalty of 1 year, 9 months and 20 days of confinement. To the last three, the magistrate allowed the benefit of searches for 2 years. There was also a penalty equivalent to 10 minimum wages for every defendant." Released in March, Petkov was convicted but retained his freedom, like José Gaspar and Garibaldi Jr. About the list of people the artist alleged denounced, it is contained in the process available in the Justice Court. In an interview I made with Petkov for my research, he affirms that he was intimidated and tortured during the 9 days he was at the police station's jail, before he was sent to Carandiru prison, where he stayed more time. And he claims that the list didn't come from his testimony, but was actually found in a notebook with names and phone numbers. This list is in the page 21 of the process. This form says that Petkov presented himself willingly to the police chief in the day that followed his prison, wanting to clarify spontaneously the people with whom he maintained relations of friendship, in the artistic word, and that led by the spirit of curiosity or even experience acquired or gained the lysergic acid. In his interview, Petkov told me that he didn't even wait for the end of the trial to leave the country. He moved to London, where he would stay for 5 years in exile. In his first day in England, he found that a caravan of Brazilian artists, most of them who also lived in Europe because of dictatorship, like Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso, and the movie director Glauber Rocha, was among the thousands of people who went to Isle of Wight Festival, where Miles Davis, Joan Baez, and the Doors were playing. He went there, a place where we dropped acid in the morning and in the afternoon, found his friends, and got to see one of the last performances of Jimi Hendrix, who would die shortly after. The festival happened between the 26th and 30th of August of 1970, and the guitarist would die a few days later, in September 18. One of the defendants asked for the removal of the mentions to his name in the convictions file years later, by the end of the 70s, which was granted by the justice. This is one of the last pages of the documents in this case in the archive. I didn't find information on the other defendants and their whereabouts, which I intend to do, because I find this case very emblematic. The LSD is still forbidden in Brazil, but nowadays the public debate and the repressive discourse pays more attention to marijuana and crack cocaine than to this substance. The military dictatorship formally no longer exists, but our prisons continue to get more and more crowded. Thank you very much.